Hey guys, welcome back to Proper Chuffed. My name's Hilton and I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. In the past week, 200 subs. Big ups team, thank you very much for joining me on the journey. It's absolutely fantastic. 200 is a really crazy number to get to, I think in a month or so of being on YouTube. So thank you very, very much. There have been so many comments coming in and I've been responding to each and every one of them. I really appreciate the feedback. There have been some really constructive things that have been said, so thank you very, very much. I've had a couple really great chats with people all over the world and it's been very cool. So thank you for that. If you are new here, please consider subscribing. It would be a great help to me. It's always nice to have new people on board and have people to chat to. I really do appreciate it. If you're a returning viewer, thanks for coming back. It's good to see you again. So let's talk about this layout. Initially, when I started this whole model railway journey, my plan was to just have this crazy little DCC layout and just plug in and play. It's not how it goes, obviously. It's come to my attention that I have very much to learn. And in doing so, I've decided to really go back to the roots of, I guess, model railroading and start with the DC layout because I think that's probably the best place for me to pick up all the skills and knowledge that I need to really build something bigger and better in the future. So my first layout will initially be a DC layout. However, I'll do my best to kind of wire it up together so that if I do want to add DCCC in the future, I can do so. So one of the first things that I've decided to do with the layout is add a new section onto it, which gives me a bit more area to play in and allows me to add a bit of interest to the layout as opposed to the two sort of ovals that you've seen previously on the layout. And the second thing is that I'm actually getting rid of most of my set track. So I've decided to ditch the Lima set track that I have. I'm gonna stick with the Hornby stuff because I've got some fantastic third radius curves which fit perfectly on the way and shape my layout is. But in addition to that, I'm actually gonna use Pico Streamline. Pico Streamline allows for bending of tracks, which is really, really cool. It does require a little bit more work though, however, because you do have to sort of trim track in certain sections if you're trying to achieve a certain length. But if you've got something like a Dremel or a rail cutter, you can do this quite easily. I fortunately do have a Dremel, so I'm able to use that when I'm cutting up my flex track. It's quite a daunting process, but in the end, it tends to work out quite well. Before I dive into sort of like my layout map, I want to just talk about the layout itself a little bit more regarding sort of what I plan it to be. Now I've spoken, I think, very briefly about this before, but my intention is that I'm creating a Highland heritage line. That way it allows me to sort of run trains from all sorts of different eras together and not feel like I'm restricted to a certain time period. So I think something along the lines of Aviemore, Strathspey Railway, but it really will be a fictitious railway. Oops. It doesn't really fit into any specific area. And I guess the plan will be that it just needs to have a bit more interest other than the sort of oval that you've seen previously. So I've added sort of two sort of points of interest. One is a loco yard. I think it's always looked fantastic in model railways when people have their locomotives on display somewhere in the middle. Looks like the engines work there. They keep busy. So a loco yard's been kind of one of my priorities. The second priority is I wanted to do something interesting in terms of buildings. I didn't want to create a town because I find, to be honest with you, towns are kind of boring. Town could be off the layout as far as I'm concerned, and somewhere behind me. I don't need to see it to kind of get a sense that people are around that area. So instead, I wanted to add a distillery. I've actually myself traveled to the Glenlivet distillery before and thoroughly enjoyed that. And I thought it would be really cool to incorporate some kind of whiskey distillery on the layout. That way, the heritage line could serve as not only a steam line, but it could also add a bit of interest with the distillery as like some kind of tour expedition. Like little branch line locos could take you up to the whiskey distillery. You could have a dram or two and then head back down on the train to the express line where you could get taken back to whatever destination it is. So I thought that would be kind of cool, and that's kind of the direction I'm heading in. So being on Mac, I unfortunately don't have access to a lot of the programs that the Windows guys do, which seems to be the sort of majority of railway planners are based on Windows. Not a problem. I have found a fantastic program called Rail Modeler Express Pro. Unfortunately, I don't have the fully licensed version. It was just a little bit steep in terms of pricing for me. So what I've had to do is design my track in 2 sections, because the program itself, the free version, only allows for, I think, 50 elements to be added at a time. So I'm going to chuck that up and you can take a look at what I've designed. Now, as you can see, the layout has expanded beyond the initial 1.2 by 2.4 plan that I had. And within that, I've decided to create a lot more sort of interest, and this is where it kind of gets scary. All these orange points that you see here all require their own wiring and their own little motors to operate correctly. And the difficulty comes in when you start wiring it for DC. Now, my intention is to have 2 controllers running, one on the outer line, which is the express line, as you can see, this red one. And then the inner line, which I consider my sort of branch line, this one is currently in blue. That would serve as my branch line, and that would sort of serve as the next section, which I'll show you in a moment. On the new baseboard that I've added, my intention is to create a bit of interest and allow me to test different heights. This is where I kind of need a little bit of help. And I'm not asking you to, help me build a model railway, but I certainly appreciate any advice here. My intention is to create a basic layout that would allow me to test different things. Firstly, I want this layout to help me test radiuses, tighter corners, and that will be on the branch line. Secondly, I want to be able to test elevation. In this regard, I have planned a sort of mountainous area on the second baseboard that will serve as part of the branch line. And thirdly, I think it was just important for me to be able to run at least 2 locomotives at once. So to be able to isolate one section of track from another, i.e. the express line from the branch line, and be able to operate 2 different controllers and have those 2 locomotives running independently on their tracks. So having said that, it's been quite sort of daunting for me now looking at the layout as it stands on the table and thinking, oh, what next? I don't even know where to begin. And I think it was important for me to kind of figure out exactly, first of all, what to do with the outer line. So that's kind of been put in place and is now solid. I can test trains on there, which is fantastic. It's the inner lines and also the sort of sidings and yards that I intend to build that are kind of freaking me out, as well as the gradient that'll go up towards the mountain. So I think let's take a look at it in a little bit more detail from at least my perspective, so you can see hands-on where I'm kind of going with this. So a layout plan is one thing on a computer screen, but it's completely different in person, and this is what I'm looking at. As you can see, I've added this sort of baseboard here, and I have yet to attach it to the original one. However, they're sitting very flush with each other at this point, and that works nicely. So as I mentioned, the outer line is the express line. That will go all the way around the track and serve as a continuous running loop for my bigger locomotives to work on. Additionally, I have created this sort of siding here, this pass-through siding, to allow me to take one loco off the track and put another one on. Looking a little bit closer, this is sort of what I'm thinking, is having an express point here that leads off onto the branch line, which will then carry through to sort of engine sheds. Now, as you can see here, I'm debating whether to put the loco sheds and servicing yard here, or alternatively, I will put it here. At this point, I'm undecided. It might be a little bit easier to have it leading from this side, just to help with the sort of natural flow from the express line. Over here, I've used the Pico Flex track to create a little bit of interest as opposed to a continuous loop. It just sort of heads off on the side, and my intention is to put together some kind of station here that will serve as the sort of station for the main line. And then going around this side, there's a number of lines that sort of break off here. Now, again, the inner ring is sort of the branch line loop, but it breaks off with the intention of heading up some kind of gradient. As you can see here, I've put Pico Flex track along here just to show, sort of indicate where I intend to have that line leading. And that will continue up. And this is now where I sort of come into a debate, is that enough of a length to get over that track? Now, in my brain, I'm saying no. Perhaps I need to have that line leading earlier, perhaps on that corner, breaking off and then coming up, just because it needs a bit more length. And then it will continue to lead up and onto a sort of plateau up here. The intention is to have then a tunnel entrance on that side for the express line and an exit somewhere here, so that there will be access to the tunnel from the back, but this will serve as some sort of plateau. My intention to have a gradient on here was really just for testing more than anything else, and to create a degree of interest, I guess. So my kind of thinking is that this plateau would maybe be, I guess, 5 to 10 centimeters tall, roughly about this height, enough that it won't be too steep of a gradient for the locomotives who are working the branch line up to what is potentially a distillery is too steep, but enough that, you know, it would be safe for a small locomotive to do so. Because it's a bit lighter, it's unlikely to grip the tracks as well as that. So this is my sort of conundrum. I do want this elevation, and I'm just trying to figure out in my mind how that all sort of pieces together. I will do some tests for it just to see if it all sort of comes together in some way, shape or form. But as it stands, I'm a little bit dubious as to whether that might be too steep. And then the second part of that is this section here. Now, my intention is that this passing line here also serves as a sort of off layout service route, so that sort of mainline locomotives can potentially join onto here and then be siphoned onto the Heritage Railway, which would be the rest of the track and layout. As that stands, I'm thinking of perhaps having a couple lines down the side, just so that if I have no space in the locomotive depot, I can actually store locomotives here, and it would serve as a sort of fiddle yard on its own, but with detail, if that makes much sense. So that's just sort of an overview of where my sort of Scottish Highland heritage line is going right now. As you can see, it's sort of a amalgamation of different ideas and things that are happening in my brain that I'm trying to put down onto track and into words. I hope it makes sense for you guys. I'll try and improve on these. I intend to do sort of like step by step as I build it from this point onwards. So I'll keep giving you guys updates. Hopefully you enjoy them. I'd really appreciate any feedback. I'll maybe pop down some dimensions of the layout itself, just so you've got a better understanding of the gradient that I may be working with, and I'd appreciate any kind of feedback on that, because that's kind of what's worrying me at this point the most. And then we'll get onto wiring, which is equally scary, but I'm sure it'll be fine and it will all work out fairly well. But we have a new logo on the layout, so it's time to take a look at that. I'm looking forward to sharing with you guys what I've picked up. As I've mentioned, really hard to find British stuff in South Africa right now, especially on the secondhand market. New stuff is just way too expensive for me to bring in. I can't see myself doing that for quite a while. Regardless, I'm excited about this locomotive and looking forward to sharing it with you. So let's dive in. So here she is. This is a Bachmann Rebuilt Patriot class featuring a 460 wheel arrangement. This is now the second Bachmann that I've picked up in my collection. She is a bit of an older model, And I think probably the most expensive one I've bought so far. I think this cost me around £62 roughly. But I'm looking forward to having her running on the layout. She is an LMS loco, which fits in nicely with my layout plans. So I can just open up this little flap here. Got a little bit of history. You're welcome to pause and read that if you want. Here's the actual loco itself, featuring an LMS black livery. I believe this loco's name is Morecambe and Heysham, which I think are 2 towns in the UK. But let me open her up and we can take a look at her in a bit more detail. So she comes packaged in a sort of standard styrofoam box, I suppose, which is typical for older locomotives. Let's take a look at this tender first. Nice riveting detail here. Metal wheels, which is nice. Somebody actually did ask me to point out in the future videos, these are not sprung buffers, these are solid, which is fine. But there's some nice riveting detail here. Obviously it seems to be missing its pipes here. Otherwise, not too intricately detailed. It's definitely could do with a bit of weathering. And then the loco itself. Yeah, so she's actually got some really great detail here. I really like this. I like the riveting here on the wheels. That immediately sort of strikes me. There's the name there, Morecambe and Heysham, I think is how you pronounce it. Separately fitted handrails. This pipe work here also separately fitted. Some nice riveting detail on the cylinders. Up top here, this seems to be plastic, the whistle. Safety valves are, I believe, a metal of sorts. No, they might be a plastic. For the most part, a plastic body all over. Same as the running plate plastic. Looking at the front here, smoke box dart is part of the mold. However, there are separately fitted handrails up here. Again, as I mentioned, buffers are not sprung. What's quite interesting here is this lead truck is it's set on a spring with a sort of piece of plastic on it that can slide backwards and forwards. And I'm guessing that is to help it sort of run around corners a little bit easier. It's an interesting little design, not something I've seen before. I'm not very well versed on Bachmann models as of yet. But that is an interesting design. It kind of feels a little bit odd, sort of just dangling there. Tender is locked in here, I believe. It's also quite an interesting design. It's just sort of an open plastic gap where the tender hook just sort of slots in there and is able to sort of freely move around. I suppose it's not a bad design, but it's definitely the first time I've seen something like that. I'm assuming this is a split chassis, as I don't see any pickups on the wheels. So I'm assuming this is another one of Bachmann's split chassis designs, which is fine. It just means that, you know, in the future I wouldn't be able to really convert it to DCC because I think that's quite a difficult task. Overall, though, a beautiful little loco. She could definitely do with some weathering, I think, like most new models. There's obviously the little mold casting line on the top there, which I'm not particularly a big fan of, but I can't really complain. I know the newer stuff doesn't really have it, but for my older collection, I'm getting quite used to this mold line here. However, I'm very happy to have her on the line. She's a stunning little loco. So let's put her on the track and see how she does. And boom, a magical Hilton appears right in front of his locomotive. She's a stunning little loco. I find it quite interesting that this is not a tender-driven loco. And also the mechanics behind this, the entire construction of Bachmann, is a huge divorce from what I've come to expect of Hornby locomotives. Again, this is probably a pretty old locomotive, Not exactly sure when it was produced, but I will find out and post it on the screen. But interesting construction, especially from those leading wheels with that spring that just sort of swivels back and forth, as well as the tender. This plastic bit that sort of just works between inside just underneath the cab there. It's an interesting design, but having put it around the layout a few times, it has no issues at all. And it's very impressive, actually. It looks quite natural going around corners. Unlike a lot of the Hornby locos that sort of tend to sort of stick their noses out into a tighter radius. It actually looks quite good. And I'm impressed with that. Overall, it's a good looking little loco. I'm happy to have it on the layout. It's not blowing me away by any means. I think that it would definitely benefit from a bit of weathering on it, just to make it look a little bit more used. I guess my problem with most model trains is that they come out of the box looking like model trains. I've seen so many guys weathering their stuff, and they do it so beautifully that they really do look like miniature versions of the real thing, whereas these look more like toys. So it'll do with a bit of weathering, and I'll get to that in a later video because I'm quite looking forward to doing that actually. Overall though, very happy with it. Again, one of the more expensive locomotives I've bought, but it runs beautifully, super smooth, and I'm happy to have it on the layout. So that's that. So a little bit of a different episode there. You've got all sorts going on here. The layout plans, I think, are probably the most daunting part of all this. I've mentioned that probably too many times in this video. I am a little bit nervous about all of it. But as somebody in the YouTube comments said the other day, it really is just about doing it at your own pace. Now, I totally understand that, and I agree. It should be about doing it at my own pace. There's a part of me that kind of really wants to get going and get things done and get it all wired up and running and no problems. But I realize it's more about the journey. And, once this layout's finished and it's been all put together and detailed up, there'll come a time where there's nothing else to do other than run the trains, which, is fantastic. But I think it's about enjoying every step of this and not feeling like I must rush to the finish line by any means. I'm sure you would agree with that. So we'll take it step by step, episode by episode. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please drop me a thumbs up and please consider subscribing. In the meantime, I hope you keep well. Thank you for your time, as always. Keep your engines fired and stay on track, and I shall see you soon. Ciao.